welcome back to episode 21 of Turn Bark Time. I am the Turn.
I'm the Bark.
And we're still going to be here a long time. Today's episode was supposed to be a Thursday shenanigans, but I will take full responsibility. I fell asleep on my couch, and I did not wake up when Barker called me on Skype and my phone. So, all on me. I take full responsibility for that. So this is going to be a Friday shenanigans, so hopefully you enjoy it. We are going to talk about something that I'm pretty impassioned about. I would say that I'm a firm believer, and that is our furry friend and the ultimate social distancing champion, also the world hide-and-seek champion, that is Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, or many of the other names he goes by or she goes by.
The Skookum, Slapu.
Yep, from the natives.
Lots of them.
Absolutely. So, again, one of the big things here, Bigfoot supposed to be this abnormally large humanoid figure that wanders the Cascade Mountains of Washington State and Oregon, supposedly, as well. Yeah, I mean, it's such a fun topic, and it's played up so much, right? Like, I mean, you guys probably have seen before where, like, you've had the debate in your household whether or not it's real. One of my favorite lines is, like, there's a Family Guy episode where, like, we're going to show you a picture of what looks to be a Sasquatch that will sure spark debate in your household. And then it's like they show, like, a picture, and it's like, clearly that's real. And it's like, no, it's not. But no, look at it. Why would anyone make that up? Like, and it just goes on and on.
So Washington, according to the BFRO, the Bigfoot Research Organization, Washington State has the most Bigfoot or Bigfoot-like creature, because all over the country there are sightings of, I think down south they call it like the skunk ape.
Yeah. Skunk ape or swamp ape or something like that.
I think it's interchangeable.
Yeah.
But in Washington State, it is Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Sasquatch, you want to talk about the etymology? Where do words come from, Daddy? Sasquatch is taken from a Salish language, which was a language group that was in Western Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia. And the tribe that actually kind of, like, I guess, had the word that became anglicized into Sasquatch was in southern BC. So we straight up lifted that. And then, like, another term like skookum, I think we had a poem in our advisory curriculum a couple of years ago about the skookum.
Yep.
And it was about this guy at the top of the mountain and stuff. Skookum comes from the Chinook language family, from Chinook jargon, which is kind of like right here where this, like, Washington's like hugging my head. That's for the Chinook Indian tribes were. And so skookum in Chinook meant strong, brave, or impressive. And so, like, I always think when you drive up I-5, there's a place called, like, Skookum Creek.
Yeah.
And then once you get back in towards the mountains, which is where these creatures are supposed to habitate, and you can see that a lot of the sightings are the black dots there on the map. They follow the Cascade Mountain Range and then kind of up into the Okanagan Highlands. And there's a little bit down in the Blue Mountains, but almost none in the Columbia Basin. So sorry, Quincy, you're probably not, according to the data,
yeah,
as suspect as it could be,
yeah,
you're not very likely to see one of these guys walking down the street. So what is it? There's 8 counties in Washington, of course, all from the BFRO, that don't have any sightings on record, and Grant County is one of those. And there's many of them are in the, Columbia Basin area where there are no mountains, where you wouldn't expect to see one. Like, when you talk to, like, cryptozoologists, so people who are looking for animals that may or may not exist, whether it's the Tasmanian tiger. At one point they thought, like, gorillas were fictitious animals. So
that's actually a fun story, and I love bird walking. But when the Romans actually, like, land in Africa, there's, like, there's these humanoid figures. Is it the Romans? Yeah, I think it's the Romans, and they basically talk about how they run into these creatures that look like us, but they think that they're like these people, and they're just not sure, and they end up it ends up being like gorillas is what they're talking about. So I always thought that was really funny.
So we kind of, where this begins, Bigfoot or Sasquatch, goes back to Native American oral traditions. Like there's stories of, I guess, the big, like, hairy humanoids living in the Pacific Northwest with Native Americans or First Nations, because it does extend into Canada. And I think at the White River Museum in Auburn, Washington, they actually have an exhibit on Sasquatch, and they have accounts or descriptions from 15 different Northwest tribes of Bigfoot or some other kind of like wild man Bigfoot creature.
Oh, really?
And kind of some of the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was saying, oh, really?
Yeah. And kind of the, I guess, the themes that they picked up is like they generally steal food. Like if you leave fish out or you leave game out to like dry, it could be stolen in the night. Sometimes they'll steal tools. And then you start getting kind of into like the cultural like norm of having some sort of like boogeyman to keep kids at home at night.
Yeah.
So there are accounts of Sasquatch like stealing women, stealing children, and then like using it. Some tribes used it as, in the same form of like La Llorona down in Mexico and other Spanish-speaking Central American countries, where you have like, some sort of being or spirit that is out at night, that if you are out when you should be at home like asleep, something bad will happen to you.
Yeah, they're gonna get you. And that was I read that for Native American tribes actually used it to really, that's how they described the Sasquatch, and like what it would do is it was more of along the lines of scare children. And it was like that was the type of method they used. And so oh, go ahead. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
I mean, like they include the Quinault. There's a tribe from the Vancouver Islands that the name was not something I would pronounce well enough that I would feel good about putting on YouTube.
Yep.
The Muckleshoot. There was a number of stories from the Muckleshoot tribe, and then the Suquamish, I believe I'm saying that, and Lummi, the Lummi tribe as well.
Okay.
So, I mean, some of the rather more established tribes in Washington that, have reservations and such. And then there's debate about what happens. And also there's a pretty well-known guy who's a member of the Yakima tribe that worked for the Forest Service on kind of the backside, the eastern slopes, who's done a number of research and stuff. And I mean, I remember growing up with my dad, who's a pretty big Bigfoot enthusiast, saying stuff where, like, certain people that lived on the reservation, like if you lived on the backside of like Mount Adams and stuff, like there were certain things that like the women wouldn't go out, like wouldn't go out in the woods by themselves, even in like modern times, like, what I mean? It was just like, you don't do that. Like there's some sort of
squatching,
just kind of like a spoken thing, like don't do it. And then they said some of the stories kind of say that as like Europeans show up, the Sasquatch like begins to like retreat into the mountains more and more. And there's kind of like conflicting evidence where some of them say like he's this boogeyman wild man who's going to steal your kids. And then there's others that are like, they just didn't like technology and they retreated back into the mountains because they didn't like all the new technology that was coming in with, what I mean? It's kind of that nature versus technology theme.
Well, going back even further, so like one of the things we were looking at, and I'm gonna probably say this wrong, but there's so one of the first times we see Sasquatch, where we try and figure out the origin story of them, is this thing, and I'm gonna say it wrong. It's I think it's Gigantopithecus.
Gigantopithecus.
Yeah, Gigantopithecus. And so basically, it was these it's the idea that it was a land migration, such as like what we believe for humans, like either the Bering Land Bridge or crossing by water. But somehow they got over here because there is this guy was in a Hong Kong. Let me double check to see if I can find his name. He was in a Hong Kong pharmacy, and he came across the jaw of like a large humanoid like creature. And so they asked him where he found it, and they started finding more and more of these jaws. And apparently it's this creature that looks similar to an orangutan and was about 10 feet tall and wandered. And it's thought that they would probably have walked similar to orangutans with like their knuckles down and things like that. But then start to think that like, oh, if we talk about evolution, like these creatures are the Sasquatches that we see, right? Because Sasquatch, we call them Bigfoot because obviously we found tracks that are bigger than the average human foot. And so they take a look and say, okay, like usually a big feet corresponds with height. And so you're thinking a taller creature, right? Something that's, not normal human size. And that they came over here and have worked their way into these mountains and stuff like that. And come on, folks, there's too many black dots behind Barker's head to not think that there's something out there.
And to get an idea of what a Gigantopithecus would look like, if you watch the newest computer animated version of the Jungle Book, that is actually what King Louis is modeled after what they believe a Gigantopithecus would look like. Now, a lot of people would say one of the biggest, I guess, kind of like problems people have with the Gigantopithecus theory is that orangutan, right, are orange or like reddish orange in fur color, and Sasquatch runs the gamut from like black to white to silver to brown, red, all these different kinds of like hair colors. So maybe it's an adaptation.
Yeah.
And then when you start kind of getting people moving west, these stories, these oral traditions that settlers would write off as, stories, where the tribes would be like, no, you don't understand. Yeah. Like there's always kind of like this spiritual nature to Bigfoot too. Like maybe he has like, I think this is from back. We said we weren't going to talk about other parts of the country, but
now we can talk about it.
It was, I think, somewhere in Oklahoma. The native name for Bigfoot is like he who makes you forget, and that kind of, if you think about psychology, like when the body experiences something that it can't process, like it can just edit stuff out.
Yeah.
And so like, you freeze. It's that fear response.
Yeah.
So you never know. And I mean, I would almost say living in Washington, you can almost find within 5 degrees of yourself, maybe even 3. I would say even 3. This is not scientific, by the way. It's just my guess. You could find somebody who has some sort of a Bigfoot story.
Yeah.
First.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. It's always something that's crazy out there and stuff like that. And you just think about, the odds of seeing something that can't be explained. We talked about UFOs earlier and stuff like that, and the unidentified flying objects. There's tons of things out there that can't be explained. And how hard is it to believe that there is this race of like, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, like humanoid ape like people that walk up on 2 feet. Yeah, I mean that have lived in this solitude for a while, and maybe they're I mean, my guess is they're solo creatures, right? Because you never see like 2 of them at once. It's always someone sees one of them and catches a glimpse of them. And so maybe they come together to mate one time and then they make one and that's it. And then they just are out roaming. And maybe their women don't go out. maybe it's just their men are like, no, don't go out. There's white people and humans and all this stuff. So
one of the best stories, being that I'm from Longview, Washington, there was a story in the 1924 in the Oregonian dealing with what became and is still known as Ape Canyon up by Mount St. Helens.
Yeah.
It was like 8 miles away from Spirit Lake. There were 5 prospectors who were up there looking for gold and apparently encountered like 4 big feet. And they like shoot at them. They injure one. kill it, and apparently like falls off a cliff, and then like they run away, go back to their cabin, and then like that night their cabin is like pelted with raw, like large stones, and like they can say that these big, they describe them as 7 foot tall, 400 pound gorilla men, like pound on the cabin, and at one point like break a hole in the roof, and they're like only the dawn, like when daylight comes, they like go away, and the people like book it back down to Kelso, and then like tell everybody about, or later describe what happened. And then there's also been, being that we're just now kind of like commemorating the 40th anniversary of the eruption of Mount St. Helens, there's always been some kind of like, there's reports of, as they were taking away all of the animals that were killed by the volcanic blast, that, you know, there's, I couldn't find it, but I know I've seen it, I've read it multiple times. There's an account of this big hairy arm like hanging out of like a net as they're like taking a bunch of like deer and elk that were killed during the, you know, the eruption, and people are like, oh dude, it had to be, you know, the government was taking away the Sasquatch. So
it's a fun thing to talk about. Like, it's just it's an interesting like thing. It's a myth from our section of the country, or a fact, you know what I mean? But it's at least a legend that's built up. And something, yeah, there you go. I was trying to make that fit my screen, and it did not work. So
this is from the Patterson Gimlin. I think Gimlin. Yeah, I want to say it's Gimlin.
Yeah, it's
Patterson's the one that gets the credit for it most of the time. Robert Patterson and Bob. I think it's Gimlin. It's either Gimlin or Ginlin. But this is from '67 down in California, Bluff Creek, California, Northern California. These two guys were out in the woods, and there'd been reports before of loggers encountering odd things in the woods as they were logging. And they come across this creek bed, and this is one of the most scrutinized videos, you know, of all time. They've stabilized it, taken out the shaky cam, tried to look at the biometrics of how it walks, and, you know, the biomechanics of it and stuff like that. And really, people just can't ever agree. And I know, you know, my fake niece Caitlin Ramsey, if you're out there, we are at probably like the 15-minute mark here talking about something that you're just convinced doesn't exist, and your dad is watching.
Don't pay attention.
But I mean, it's just one of these things that people love to try and find. It's science. Like, you can't prove that it does exist, but you can't prove that it doesn't exist either. So I mean, you know, something is only truth if it hasn't been disproven yet.
Yeah. So we would go on long things in college. There was a show that was called like Going Squatching, and I think it was on Netflix. But like, I would go over to my buddy Tyler's house, and all of his roommates would like just sit around and like watch it, and they would have like Sasquatch marathons trying to figure out. And I was like, well, why don't we just go up and look for it? Like, let's just go try and find it. And they're always like, no, man, you can't like find a Squatch. And I was like, well, then what are they doing? You know, he's like, oh, I'm just gonna watch people on TV. So,
but I mean, it's one of these things that it really has become part of the culture in the Northwest. So you think about like the Seattle Supersonics.
Yeah, huh? Caitlin, our fake niece's volleyball team.
Yeah, Spokane community colleges, or the community colleges of Spokane, are the Sasquatch. Roll Squatch.
Roll Squatch.
Hashtag. But do you know how many high schools have a Sasquatch mascot in Washington?
In Washington? I'd probably go out like 2 or 3.
None,
really?
Yeah, I've yet to find a high school that uses Sasquatch as a mascot. And maybe because he is cryptozoological. But I mean, like, we have dragons.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know why we don't have Sasquatch, but whatever, man. I was surprised.
Build a new school, Bark. You got it.
Oregon has 2 schools that are the honkers. Honkers, yes. They're like in the same league too. I don't know if they're in the same league, but they're close enough together they play each other. So there's some geese on geese action there. Lots of feathers.
Yeah.
But
I'd take a gander at that.
Other examples. So I talked about the Supersonics. Their mascot used to be Sasquatch.
Yeah.
Like, it was a guy in this like Sasquatch costume. Probably one of the most famous iterations of Bigfoot right now. I'm gonna make sure to put it behind my head here just so it's in frame. Is the Jack Link Sasquatch, like messing with Sasquatch, right? That's the tagline for Jack Links.
And then
go ahead.
the newest commercial is the one for Progressive Insurance, where Flo's sitting out there in the woods, and he's talking about how he's like, people used to try and take a picture of me. Now they're just taking pictures of their RV and their boat. And then she goes, well, people are moving on, Bigfoot. And he like looks down at his feet and he goes, my name's Carl.
And then probably for people in Mr. Turner and I's generation, Bigfoot that we know is Harry from Harry and the Hendersons, which is a 1987 film, I believe.
I think so.
About a Seattle family that takes the trip out towards Mount Rainier. In the intermittent lighting amongst the trees of the beautiful Northwest, they accidentally clip Bigfoot and they think he's dead, so they put him on top of the car and they take him home, and they have all kinds of crazy hijinks. If you haven't seen Harry and the Hendersons, I highly recommend it.
Worth a watch. Definitely worth a watch.
Maybe not the best for small children. The beginning's a little scary.
Yep.
He is a large ape man.
Yep.
So keep that in mind, Oh, fun fact, Pierce County has the most sightings according to the BFRO.
Let's go.
Which if you think about it, it's Tacoma and like Puyallup, like working its way back towards.
But it works towards Eatonville and like Highway 2 towards Mount Rainier.
Towards Mount Rainier.
Yeah.
Where there are just copious amounts of acres with not very many people.
Oh, totally. You go up to Eatonville, LB, and stuff like that. I remember hunting over there, and the LB store was like there's one store, one gas station, one burger stand, and then the store was the post office. So that was how they claimed to be a town.
Sounds like Adna, which I was told by one of my students to give a shout out to Mr. Salm, who's also a big Bigfoot enthusiast in our building.
Huge.
So, the other thing, if you ever get bored, and it's one of the few things that my dad uses the internet for, is to look up stories on the BFRO. There's a great one about the cowmen. I want to say the sighting is somewhere on the western side of Washington, but it's this little boy the family lives out in the woods. Traditional, kind of beginning of every story in Washington, it seems, in Hollywood, because nobody writes about the east side.
Bummer.
But
although Red Dawn was in Spokane.
Yeah, but they filmed it in Michigan.
Yeah, I know.
Hashtag not my Red Dawn. I'm still waiting for the Russians and the Cubans. Anyways, if you don't know what that means, watch the original Red Dawn. Yep. Highly recommend as well. Yep. Gosh, the 80s were great. Yep. But anyway, where was I? I lost my train of thought. The cowman. This little boy, I can't remember how it comes up, but the parent asks the kid what are you doing? And he's like, I'm talking to the cowmen. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, there's these big guys that come to my window at night and make these grunting noises like cows. And you just read it and you're like, holy crap. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's just freaky. And I mean, I lived out in the sticks. Yeah. I mean, we had running water and whatnot. I mean, we're not, doomsday preppers, living in the mountains. But there was a couple times walking home at night, and there's street lamps. What are street lamps? Yeah. We were cricker kids. We lived on Abernathy Creek. And then people, everybody that lived next to the creek was our neighbors, no matter if it was 1 mile away or 5 miles away. Yep. And there was a couple times walking home in the dark that you're sitting there and you just kind of, your hair, that primal fear response, or you're the little bunny. Yep. And you're like, uh-oh, there's something bigger than me, which is why I don't swim in the ocean.
Oh, good Lord.
I know. There's lots of stuff in the ocean, but better than Bailey. Hashtag better than Bailey.
That's funny.
But there's been a couple times where,
oh yeah,
I've kind of had the hair prickles on the back of my neck, kind of going, I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, I've had that when you go hunting, and I've gone hunting by myself and stuff like that, and you sit there and when you wander and it's a bright sunny day, but you wander into that patch of just trees and it's beautiful. But now it gets a little bit darker, and you kind of are looking around something could be watching me and stuff like that. As far as we know, I mean, obviously we have a mixed variety of what Sasquatch, right? Taking women and children is the Native American lore. More modern encounters with the Sasquatch have been more peaceful, I guess, or just like more avoidance, like they're trying to avoid being seen.
Or when push comes to shove, they're trying to convince you to leave.
Yeah.
Whether it's through vocalization or like rock throwing or something like that. But it's generally not flat out like aggression against you.
Yeah, they don't attack you.
And of course, the other example, the conspiracy theorist in me says that's because they're not leaving any evidence, just like because like orcas don't attack humans. So we think because we've never had anybody live to tell about it.
Yep. Genius.
So, if you ever see my dad has a great Bigfoot story. My dad's a wonderful storyteller, and like, honest to goodness, I believe him, and that's one of the reasons that like I have a healthy kind of, like biblical respect or fear of this creature. I'm not gonna go out in the woods and like challenge it to a throwdown. I'm a little tubby hobbit. He's gonna take me out easy, but I drive White Pass all the time. I haven't seen one yet.
Yeah, but you'd think they'd avoid the road. So
there's dumb people in every animal race has dumb ones.
That's true. So, but yeah. All right. So
let us know in the comments what you think.
Yeah.
Do you think Bigfoot exists? I mean, let's just get a little bit of, keep it clean, keep it respectable, but let us know what your opinion is. Are you like, oh no, it's impossible, Caitlin Ramsey? Are you willing to wonder, like the rest of us who, why not? Why can't there be? And it's so interesting that across the world in mountainous regions, there tends to be
what? Yeah, absolutely. And
hairy people.
But I mean, like, think about this. Like, like in the Northwest, we have Bigfoot, right? Like, there's the swamp ape, skunk ape, right? That are in like the Appalachia, right?
Yeah.
And then you have they call it the abominable snowman, right? Or the Yeti, right? So that's in the Himalayas, right? Like one of the guys, I'm trying to remember who it was. I thought we talked about him earlier. Didn't we talk about that guy earlier? The UFO guy, right? Because then he wanted to go. Who's the guy? He wanted to go shoot a Yeti, and he died doing that. And he had done something else. Maybe I'm thinking a wrong thing.
I'm sure there has been a person.
I'm trying to think. Okay, now I'm having a brain fart because it was literally like this guy who wanted to go find something. And then, dang, I'm having just a massive brain fart. Anyway, he went to go find a Yeti and he died in the Himalayas after achieving something. He like wanted to go. It was the Japanese guy who wanted to go find somebody. He did it. Lived with him. Oh yeah, we were talking about this when the World War II on the island. The guy went and found him on the island. I think I was telling you about that, right?
Yeah.
He was like he was the guy who got paraded around. It was when we were talking about World War II. And he got paraded around, and then he wanted to go shoot the Yeti in the Himalayas, and he died in the Himalayas trying to find the Yeti.
Yeah, and then like in Indonesia, there's a cryptozoological being called the orang pendek, which are actually small people, like pygmy-ish people, but they're like miniature Sasquatch. And some of the native cultures talk about, I think it was the Muckleshoot called them stickmen. They talked about there were big people, the natives, and little people that were hairy. And then like when the white people showed up, the little people and the big people went to the mountains because they didn't like the Europeans or whatnot. But like it's just really interesting that there are, kind of it's just really suspicious that every culture or a lot of cultures have some sort of like hairy wild man that fits within a pretty similar, like, like if you put him in a police lineup, it'd be really hard to figure out which one's which.
Yep, totally true. So,
not saying that it was Bigfoot,
but it was Bigfoot.
It was Bigfoot.
So we're gonna Bigfoot hashtag do you believe, again, put in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Next week we are going to do a lesson on African Americans or Africans in the United States we'll probably honestly cover history up to like through colonization up through the modern period, because I mean that's what the chapter of the book does. We're going to cover the first part of it, which is going to talk about the role of slaves and everything like that. And then the shenanigans for next week, we will announce for next week when we decide. So,
as long as we stay awake for them.
Yeah, my bad. It's on me. I take total credit for it. So, until next time, I'm the Turn.
I'm the Bark.
And we're going to be here a long time. Have a good night, everybody.
Stay safe.
And be well. Peace out.